The photo loaded in under 2 seconds, and it took less than one to end my marriage. Two people, sun-browned, sharing a lounge chair built for one. A woman's foot rested against a man's calf, and around her ankle sat a woven wristband the color of wet sand. Behind them, turquoise water curled onto white sand, and beneath the photo, a caption read, "Best decompress ever. Palm trees, cocktails, #Palmetto-K." I recognized the calf before I recognized the woman's face. 3 weeks later, I would hold that exact wristband in my own hand, pulled from the bottom of my husband's gym bag, sand still caught in the weave. But that night, all I had was a stranger's Instagram post, a hashtag, and the sudden, sick certainty that my husband was not where he told me he was. Derek had left 4 days earlier for what he called a solo trip, a cabin somewhere with no cell signal, time to unplug after landing the biggest account of his career. "It's just a solo trip, babe," he told me, kissing my forehead like a period at the end of a sentence. "I need to unplug." He'd been gone 2 days when his mistress posted the resort's name to 11,000 followers, one of whom happened to be me. I sat with my phone in the dark for a long time before I let myself feel anything about it at all. Welcome back to Revenge Love Story, where the truth always outlasts the lie. If you've ever caught someone in a lie this small and found something this enormous underneath it, tell me in the comments and hit subscribe, because this one has a lot of ground to cover. My name is Olivia Smith. I was 34 years old, and for 9 years I had run one of the most requested event planning companies in Millhaven, one wedding, one gala, one corporate launch at a time. I was good at my job for one specific reason. I noticed things other people missed. A loose thread on a groom's jacket 4 minutes before he walked down the aisle. A caterer running late by a margin nobody else would catch. A husband who kissed me goodbye a half-second longer than usual, like he was trying to convince himself of something. By the time all of this started, my company had a wait list 11 weeks long and a wall in my office with thank you notes from brides who swore I'd saved their weddings from small disasters they never even found out about. I had built that reputation on paying attention. It never once occurred to me that I'd stop paying attention at home. 3 years earlier, I had been accepted into a luxury event design certification program in Atlanta. The kind of credential opens doors in 3 new cities at once. It cost $4,200, non-refundable, due the same month Derek needed funding for an unpaid 2-week trip to chase a flooring distribution deal in Charlotte. I gave up my deposit without telling him what it actually cost me. I told myself it was an investment in us. I never asked him to pay any of it back, and I never mentioned it again, not until much later, when a forensic accountant asked me to list every dollar I had quietly absorbed on my husband's behalf. The client I still think about most was a bride who called me sobbing 4 hours before her ceremony because the florist had used the wrong shade of ivory on every centerpiece. I remixed the arrangements myself with flowers from 3 different vendors under 90 minutes, and the bride never found out how close her wedding photos had come to looking wrong. That was the version of myself I trusted most, the one who fixed things quietly before anyone else even knew they were broken. Derek and I met at a mutual friend's engagement party, back when I was 23 and still building the business out of my apartment's 2nd bedroom. He asked me what I did for a living, listened to the whole answer without checking his phone once, and then asked a genuinely good follow-up question, which at 23 felt like the rarest thing in the world. Derek Marsh was 39, a regional sales director for a flooring distribution company, and on paper, he was an excellent husband. He remembered my mother's birthday before I did. He fixed the gutter before I ever noticed it had come loose. Early in our marriage, he'd once driven 90 minutes through a snowstorm with a spare generator when a client's wedding tent lost power, arriving in borrowed galoshes with a grin like he'd solved something heroic. That was the Derek I married, the one who showed up. And for a long time, showing up was enough to make me stop asking harder questions. He was good at his job in the same way I was good at mine, reading a room, sensing what people wanted before they said it out loud. Clients trusted him instantly. So did I for 11 years, which is its own kind of evidence about how good he really was at it. His job kept him on the road 2, sometimes 3 weeks a month, and I had never once questioned it, because questioning it would have meant questioning the entire architecture of our marriage. That spring, he had closed the Ferris flooring account, the biggest deal of his career, and he told everyone, including me, that he had finally earned a real break. What I didn't understand yet was that somewhere in the last year, Derek had started to believe he was owed things nobody else was allowed to ask him for. The first crack was small enough to miss entirely. Derek booked his solo trip only 4 days before he left, which wasn't like him at all. He usually planned travel a month out, flights locked, hotel points redeemed, a spreadsheet for every leg, because underneath the charm, he was meticulous to a fault. This time, he wouldn't tell me which cabin, which town, or which company owned the property. "It's just a rental, babe, nothing fancy," he said when I asked twice. I remember thinking it was strange, and then I remember making the conscious decision to stop thinking about it, because that was so much easier than the alternative. One night before he left, I glanced at his phone screen while it lit up on the kitchen counter. Just a preview line, gone in 2 seconds. It said something about a confirmation and a name I didn't recognize. I told myself it was a hotel booking site, because that was the version of the sentence I could live with. 2 weeks before he left, Derek started sleeping with his phone face down on the nightstand, something he had never done in 11 years of marriage. Once, when it buzzed with an alarm I needed to silence, he crossed the room in 3 quick steps and lifted it from my hand, gently, the way you'd disarm something rather than take it. "Work stuff," he said. "Nothing exciting." I believed him because believing him costs nothing, and not believing him would have cost everything I thought I had. Around that same time, he changed his phone's passcode without mentioning it, and when I asked, almost as a joke, he laughed and said security was just good practice these days. I laughed too, and put a small, cold note of it in the back of my mind, the way you'd flag a line item that didn't quite reconcile. A week after that, I opened our joint house fund, the one we'd built for 4 years toward a down payment, and found it $1,100 lighter than it should have been. The withdrawal was labeled only transfer, with no note attached. I asked Derek about it over dinner, casually, the way you ask about something you've already decided not to make a scene over. He said it was a deposit for the cabin, waved his fork like the subject was closed, and asked if we had more of the roasted potatoes. I wrote the number down anyway, in a notebook I normally reserved for client budgets. The following week, another $1,900 disappeared the same way. Then, 10 days after that, $2,800 more, tagged this time as MISC. I stopped asking Derek about the withdrawals out loud. I just kept writing the numbers down. The bank actually flagged one of the transfers as unusual activity and called our landline to confirm it, an automated voice reading back a dollar amount while I stood frozen in the kitchen holding a dish towel. I confirmed the transfer anyway, because I wasn't ready yet to explain to a stranger on the phone why I was crying over a bank statement. We canceled a standing Sunday dinner with my parents twice that month. Both times because Derek said work had blown up, and both times I noticed he took the calls from a different room with the door mostly closed. I told my mother he was under pressure at the office. I almost believed it myself while I was saying it. He also started going to the gym at odd hours, sometimes 11 at night, sometimes 6 in the morning before Nora was even awake. Always with the same black duffel bag. I never once thought to look inside. I remember being almost proud of him for the sudden discipline, which is a strange thing to admit now, knowing what that bag was actually carrying back and forth. 3 nights before Derek left for his solo trip, his company held a client appreciation dinner, and I came along the way I always did, in a navy dress I'd already worn to a dozen rooms just like it. Derek had a little too much wine and a little too much confidence, and when a colleague turned to me and asked politely what I did for a living, Derek answered before I could open my mouth. "She just throws parties for a living," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, laughing like it was the easiest joke in the world. "It's not exactly a real career." The table laughed along with him. One woman across the table caught my eye for half a second, an apologetic flicker before she looked back down to her plate. I smiled, the way you do, and I ordered a dessert I didn't want, and I said nothing on the entire drive home. I wrote that sentence down too, that night, under the same date as the $1,100 and the notebook that was slowly becoming something other than a planner's ledger. I underlined it twice, which was more emotion than I'd let myself show him all evening. Before my father died, he told me one thing about marriage I never forgot. "Always keep something that belongs only to you," he said, not out of distrust, but out of self-respect, because a woman with nothing of her own has nothing to stand on if the floor ever gives out beneath her. I want you to remember that too, because it matters later. 8 years earlier, before Derek and I married, I had opened a small savings account under my maiden name, Olivia Whitcomb, and I never closed it, and I never once mentioned it to him. It sat quietly growing, $22,000 that belonged to nobody but me, tucked at a credit union across town that Derek had never had any reason to visit. Derek left for his cabin on a Tuesday morning, kissing my forehead the same way he always did. By Thursday night, I was lying awake scrolling without any real purpose when Brooke Ellison's Instagram loaded a new post at the top of my feed. I knew Brooke, a little. She was a former colleague of Derek's who now ran a boutique travel concierge business, the kind of company corporate clients hired to handle every detail of a resort weekend so they never had to think about it. Logistics themselves. I had met her twice, both times perfectly forgettably pleasant, the kind of pleasant that gives you nothing to remember her by later. The post showed 2 lounge chairs pushed together, a woman's foot against a man's calf, a woven wristband, turquoise water. The geotag read Palmetto Cay Resort. The timestamp read Thursday, the same day my husband was supposedly 6 hours from the nearest cell tower in a cabin with no signal at all. I sat up in bed and did the only thing 9 years of running a business under pressure had actually trained me to do. I stopped feeling anything for a moment, and I started documenting. Screenshots with timestamps visible, the resort's rate sheet, its distance from the airport Derek had claimed to fly out of for a completely different destination. Palmetto Cay wasn't a cabin. It was an adults-only resort with a nightly rate higher than what we'd spent on our own honeymoon, a fact I confirmed at 1 a.m. with the same flat, careful attention I usually gave a wedding contract. I printed everything before sunrise because paper doesn't get deleted the way an app can. I cross-referenced the resort's package pricing against the exact dollar amounts that had gone missing from our house fund, and the numbers lined up close enough to stop being a coincidence. A 4-night couples package, taxes and resort fees included, came out within a few $100s of what Derek had quietly pulled from an account meant for our future. If you've ever felt that exact kind of quiet, the stillness right before you know something you can no longer unknow, tell me about it in the comments, because I'm about to walk you through exactly what I did with it. And if you want to see how a quiet woman with a notebook takes apart a lie one number at a time, make sure you're subscribed to Revenge Love Story, because it only gets more satisfying from here. Derek came home 4 days later. Tanned, relaxed, full of stories about hiking trails I would later learn didn't exist anywhere near that property. I didn't confront him that first night. I waited 2 mornings until the screenshots were printed and dated and sitting in a plain folder on the kitchen table. He didn't deny it the way I expected. He called it complicated. He said Brooke had happened to be at the same resorts by coincidence and that I was twisting a coincidence into a conspiracy because I'd always been insecure about his work friendships. When I called his mother, hoping for an ally, she told me gently that I should be careful about accusations I couldn't fully prove, and that plenty of marriages survived far worse than one business trip. I hung up the phone and sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes before I could make myself walk back inside. 2 weeks after Derek moved into the guest room, I did our laundry out of habit, the same as I had for a decade. When I unzipped his gym bag to pull out a stray towel, my fingers found something small and rough at the bottom, tangled in a loose sock. It was a woven wristband the color of wet sand, the paper cloth band of resort staples onto a guest's wrist at check-in. And there was still sand caught fine in the weave, dried into pale grains I could feel under my thumbnail. I didn't confront him with it that night. I put it in a sealed plastic bag and photographed it beside a ruler for scale, the same way I'd once cataloged a damaged wedding cake for an insurance claim. It became, without either of us knowing it yet, the first physical exhibit in a case that hadn't been filed. Within 3 weeks, the house fund account had gone from $86,000 to $58,000, drained in increments too small to trigger a bank alert and too large to be anyone's accident. Our daughter Nora, 7, I might never have connected the very last piece, though, if it hadn't been for Derek's sister, Paige. Paige had spent the first month gently defending her brother, telling me to give him space, to not blow up something we could still repair. She'd grown up watching their own father cut corners quietly for years, and some part of her, I think, had trained herself not to look too closely at the men she loved. She'd married and divorced once already in her 20s, for reasons she rarely discussed, and I sometimes wondered if defending Derek so fiercely was really just an old habit of defending the idea that the men in her family could still be good ones. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Paige called me in tears. While helping their parents organize old paperwork for taxes, she'd found a small family trust statement listing an authorized signer she never expected to see, Brooke Ellison, quietly added months earlier to a modest joint account Derek had once shared with their late grandmother, an account he'd apparently been using as a side pocket for resort expenses no one else was watching. "I kept telling you to give him the benefit of the doubt," Paige said, her voice cracking over the phone. "I think I was really just giving myself one." I didn't say anything for a moment because there wasn't a version of comfort I could offer either of us yet. Paige drove to my house that same night with a folder of copied statements clutched against her chest and said 6 words I don't think I'll ever forget. I didn't want to believe it either. It was the first time in a month that someone had chosen the truth over comfort, and it changed the entire shape of what I was about to do next. There's a version of this story where I never find any of that out, where Derek simply gets away with all of it. And I want you to sit with that for just a second, because it's the version so many women actually live. If someone in your life has ever flipped from doubting you to standing beside you, tell me their name in the comments below. And if you want to see exactly how a folder of statements turns into an actual plan, stay with me and subscribe to Revenge Love Story so you don't miss what comes next. Derek's parents' 40th wedding anniversary was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday in June, held at the same country club where Derek and I had gotten married 11 years earlier. Marisol and I chose that date on purpose, not out of cruelty, but out of certainty. Derek would be in exactly one place, surrounded by the people whose good opinion mattered to him most, unable to disappear into a work trip or a locked office door. We spent 2 full weeks preparing for that single Saturday, the way I would have once prepared for a client's biggest event of the year. Marisol drafted the filing, Thomas finalized the forensic report into a clean, numbered exhibit list, and I quietly arranged childcare for Nora with my sister, 3 towns over, so that whatever happened that afternoon, she wouldn't be anywhere near it. The night before, I laid every document out on my dining room table one final time. The wristband, the wire transfers, the trust statement Paige had brought me, and Marisol's filing, and I found myself arranging them the way I'd once arranged a place setting, each piece exactly where it needed to be for the moment it would actually matter. The club had hired a string quartet for the reception, the same quartet I'd once recommended to a bride 2 summers earlier, and some small, detached part of me noted that the cellist was rushing the tempo on the anniversary waltz, even as the rest of me braced for what was about to happen. I arrived a little after 2, in a dress I'd chosen carefully, and I let myself be pulled into small talk with people I'd known for over a decade, all of it perfectly ordinary, all of it a kind of countdown only I could hear. That morning, before any of it began, I made Nora pancakes and dropped her at my sister's with her favorite stuffed rabbit, and she'd asked why I looked so serious. I told her Mommy had a big meeting later, which was true enough to say out loud without lying to a 7-year-old. That morning, I authorized Marisol to file for divorce on grounds of dissipation of marital assets and to simultaneously freeze what remained of the joint house fund account before another dollar could move through it. At 2:15 that afternoon, while Derek stood on the club's terrace accepting a toast to his parents, a process server in a plain gray suit approached him quietly and handed him a sealed envelope. He didn't understand what it was until he opened it in front of nearly 40 guests, and by the time he understood, it was already done. I watched the color drain out of his face in stages, like someone slowly turning down a dimmer switch. He read the first page twice, his jaw working around words he couldn't quite say out loud. He looked up, found me standing near the terrace doors, and mouthed my name like it was a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. His phone buzzed 4 times against his hip in under 10 minutes. I would learn later that all 4 calls were from Brooke, who had just heard from a mutual contact that the very account funding her company's newest resort contract had been frozen that same hour. A few guests near the bar noticed him fumbling with his phone and drifting toward the edge of the terrace, and I could see the small ripple of attention start to move through the party the way it does when something is clearly wrong, but nobody yet knows what. He loosened his tie without seeming to notice he was doing it, then tightened it again a moment later, an unconscious little loop of a man trying to compose himself for an audience that hadn't yet realized there was anything to compose himself for. Derek pulled me aside near the coat check, gripping my arm gently, his voice dropping into something close to begging. "Please," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. "Just tell them it's a misunderstanding. I'll fix everything, I promise." I looked at him for a long moment, longer than the question deserved, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry at all. I felt finished. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't need to. I walked back onto the terrace, past his mother, who had already gone pale and silent the second she saw the envelope shaking in her son's hand, and I asked the room politely if I could add a few words to the toast. I told them about the 1100, then the 1900, then the 58,000 left of what should have been 86,000. I told them about Palmetto Cay Resort, about a woven wristband with sand still caught in it, and about K Concierge LLC, with Brooke Ellison's name attached to 4 separate wire transfers. The room went silent, and Derek's mother's hand rolled slowly to cover her mouth. Someone near the back set down a champagne glass a little too hard, and the small clink of it against the table was the only sound in the room for a moment. Paige stood near the terrace railing, arms crossed, watching her brother with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between grief and relief. I also told them quietly that I wasn't there to embarrass anyone, only to make sure the truth had the same room the lie had gotten to use for so long. A few of Derek's own colleagues, the same ones who had laughed at his joke about my not exactly a real career, were staring at their napkins by the time I finished. Then I looked at my husband, standing very still where a toast to his parents' marriage should have been happening, and I handed him back his own words, exactly as he'd once given them to me. "It's just a solo trip, babe," I said quietly. "I need to unplug." Something in his face finally broke. Not performance this time, not charm, just 11 years of pretending collapsing all at once. "I didn't want to become my father," he said. So softly I almost missed it. "I think I just did it anyway." It was the first true sentence he'd said to me in months, and it didn't change a single number in the ledger I'd already built. His father, standing a few feet away in his own anniversary suit, looked down at his shoes and said nothing at all, which felt like its own kind of answer. Later that night, once the guests had gone quiet and his parents had retreated inside, Derek asked if we could work this out privately, just the two of us, no lawyers. I told him no, gently, the way you tell someone a door is already closed rather than closing it again in front of them. Through Marisol, I laid out the terms plainly: an equitable division that accounted for every dissipated dollar, full transparency on the trust account Brooke had been quietly added to, primary residential custody of Nora with a fair and generous schedule for Derek, and no contact between our daughter and Brooke Ellison unless a court-appointed evaluator said otherwise. I asked for exactly what the numbers said I was owed, not a cent more, because I had learned that real justice doesn't need to be loud to be complete. Derek signed the settlement 11 weeks later without contesting a single line of it, which told me everything I needed to know about how much of his earlier outrage had ever really been about the truth. Derek moved into a one-bedroom apartment 11 minutes from Nora's school, and now he calls before every visit, a habit he never had in 11 years of marriage. Last I heard, he'd started seeing a counselor on his own, trying to understand why he needed a stranger's approval to feel important. Brooke Ellison's concierge company lost its two largest corporate clients within a month once word quietly got around about how one of its newest contracts had actually been funded. She sent me exactly one email. I never opened it, and I don't plan to. Paige and I still get coffee every other Sunday. She tells me she owes me an apology she'll spend years finishing, and I tell her the folder she carried to my door that night was already more than enough. Marisol still sends me a card every June on the anniversary of the filing, with nothing written inside but her initials, which somehow says more than a paragraph would. Thomas Ogawa closed out the audit with a final invoice and a single line at the bottom: "Numbers don't lie. People just hope you won't check." Nora sleeps without the nightlight again these days, most nights. She still asks, sometimes, why Daddy lives in a different house now, and I tell her the truth, in pieces small enough for a 7-year-old to hold, which is the only kind of truth I know how to give her. My own business grew that year, not less. I stopped quietly organizing everyone else's happy endings while starving my own, and somehow my clients could tell the difference in the work. I keep the resort wristband in a drawer in my office now, not as a wound, but as a reminder of exactly how much attention it takes to actually see your own life clearly. I think about my father's advice more now than I did the day he gave it to me. Keeping something of my own was never about distrusting Derek specifically. It turned out to be about trusting myself enough to notice when the floor was already giving way. People sometimes ask me if I regret waiting as long as I did to confront him instead of shouting the moment I saw that first photo. I don't. A quiet woman with a folder full of dates will always beat a loud one with nothing but a feeling, and I had spent 9 years building the patience to prove it. A lie only survives as long as nobody's counting. I counted. That's the story of the solo trip that wasn't, and the wristband that gave it all away. If any single line in this one landed hardest for you, tell me which one in the comments below, and subscribe to Revenge Love Story, because tomorrow, another husband's biggest lie finally catches up to him.